Good morning, agents. Welcome to the Broker Roundtable, where our mission is to bring some of the brightest and best valley-wide brokers to you to talk about broker issues and, more importantly, issues facing real estate agents. And it's always good as an agent to get the broker's perspective. I guarantee you, you may not know the answer to many of the questions that we're going to pose today, but we are talking about procuring cause. But before we get to that, I want to just tell you who's joining us today. We have Michael Hofstetter, who's a managing broker with West USA Realty. And in addition to that, we've also got Bob Stevens from West USA. And Marge Lindsay has stepped in at the last minute because our previous scheduled broker was unable to make it. So we appreciate that. We found her on the side of the road and a little intimidated because she's actually reading a legal book right now. So my name is Mike Weinstein with Six Figure Mind Shift. My goal really is just to help facilitate this and bring to the brokers the agent's perspective. I am simply a real estate agent who's got just as much questions as you do about some of the legal issues facing us. And so today we're going to talk about procuring cause. So basically the way this is going to work, we're just going to kind of go around the room. There are agents out there that understand what procuring cause is. There's a great deal of agents that think they understand what procuring cause is, and then there's a great deal of agents who are new to the industry and have absolutely no idea. So, Mike, let's just go ahead and start with you. How do you define when an agent comes to you and says, "What the heck is procuring cause? What is it?"
Well, procuring cause is a good question that I get all the time from agents trying to figure out where the commission goes. And that's what I think where it boils down to.
Who gets paid?
Who gets paid on this deal? You know, and when you work with a client for a long period of time and you're out showing properties or you calling them, talking to them, they're on your database for a long time, and then all of a sudden they buy another house or a property that you showed them to the prior day, and then they go to another agent. And that's where it comes up the most. Is, you know, God, I've been working with this buyer for quite a while, and it's buyers, you know, and not listing. So it's going to be always working with buyers. I've been working with this buyer, showed him, you know, houses over the past week. And there's one property I showed him yesterday, and then I called them back today, and they bought it from another agent. And they wondered, do I have procuring cause on this issue? And that's where it comes into play. And that's what we're going to talk about today with all the three brokers that we have here is how does procuring cause come about? What are some of the steps to procuring cause of figuring it out, whether we have a procuring cause case? And then if we do, where do we go from that case?
Okay. And so, Bob, could I sum it up as, you know, taking a look at the word procuring, meaning that am I, the agent, responsible for causing that buyer to find the house and ultimately buying the house? Is that kind of how we look at it?
I look at it that way. You've got to get them into a house, and they've got to make a decision with you that they want to buy this property. Do they do that? Sometimes they make the decision, but they go and get another agent. I had one yesterday. I talked to the fellow about it. He says, "Well, I told them they first need to get pre-qualified, so go to your lender before I write this up." They said they want it. So they went to the lender. The lender said, "Whoa, I've got a friend that can take care of this." And it was written up by her instead of our guy. And I just talked to him yesterday about this. He says, so sometimes they just slip away.
So needless to say, he probably will not be using that lender again.
I don't know if he even knows the lender, but I think maybe you ought to just go ahead and write it up and get it done, and then send them to a lender. But we don't do things that way. We want to make sure that they can buy the property. Why put the seller at all this risk waiting around to see if they can actually get a loan? So that's a big deal.
Well, Bob brings up a big issue there is not only do we have agents fighting for that buyer, we have lenders out there, we have title companies, we have other people that we work with that sometimes steer that buyer to someone else. Family members is another really big one, which I'm sure we'll touch on down the road. But, so there's a lot of other causes that go around procuring cause and where that buyer wants to go to buy the property from, because the buyer doesn't know. Their number one thing that they want to do is get a property. It doesn't matter who they get it from. They might have a good relationship with that agent. And that's where the problem lies in, that I see in procuring cause quite a bit, is that buyer says, I can get a property easier through this agent than the agent that showed it to me yesterday.
What can you add as far as defining procuring cause, Marge? And, because you teach a lot of agents who are brand new to the industry. So you're in a room of 20 brand new agents and someone raises their hand and says, what's procuring cause? And you have 60 seconds to answer it.
Well, I think a combination of what Bob and Michael have said honestly does sum it up. The big thing is, was the decision to purchase made as a result of my efforts? It's not so much that I have to show them the home. One of the myths out there is that you physically have to go through that home, and you don't. But was I the cause? Did I lead them to the decision to purchase that property? And if so, then I probably have a strong case. Michael made an appearance, which I loved, in a class that I did on Tuesday of this week. And we were talking about procuring cause issues. And because he was, our managing broker, and in there, some of the agents asked him some questions as it pertained to procuring cause. And we said, okay, under the circumstance as you addressed it, you would be the procuring cause. However, with one little fine twist and turn, if it was presented this way, then somebody else would be, because the determination, if it goes to, and I think you're going to talk about this a bit later, but the determination, if it goes to a hearing on who is the procuring cause, is based on a preponderance of the evidence. Just meaning that, if you look at that legal scale there, if it's just 51-49, 51's going to prevail. So, sometimes it's a fine line, and the testimony and how it's presented will make a determination or help in doing it.
And so sometimes to help us understand it, is maybe let's just throw out a scenario.
All right.
And because in these scenarios, they're real life. Nobody's making this stuff up. You guys aren't writing science fiction. These are just happening. So, okay. So here's a scenario. And a real estate agent sends their client a list of homes to drive by. So they might send them some stuff through the MLS, whatever the case is. Go drive by these. We do this a lot. I'm not sure whether it's a good idea or not, but we do this a lot. And so while the client is doing these drive-bys, another agent is holding an open house at one of the sent listings. While viewing that home, the buyer chooses to buy the home from the agent who is sitting the open house. Who gets paid, and how common does this happen?
Oh boy, it happens a lot. It truly does.
Yeah.
Who gets paid in the scenario as you've presented it? The agent who wrote the contract at the open house. Probably one of the biggest myths out there is that if I gave them the list, they went over, they drove by, I'm entitled to the commission, because without me, they wouldn't have gotten there. Well, the unfortunate part is you weren't there at the crucial time. You weren't there when the decision to purchase was made. And just giving them a list does nothing except make you a nice guy for putting them or pointing them in the right direction.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring up a point that agents, when you're out there and you're working with your clients, I want to change your mindset a little bit on how you're thinking about when you work with that client, because when you're bringing that buyer to the listing agent, you're not getting paid, or you're not getting that commission to represent that buyer. You're getting paid that commission to bring that buyer to the listing agent, and that's what the commission is earned from what's on that MLS. It's bringing them the buyer, not representing them. Where a lot of agents think that, I'm sending this paperwork over to them, or I have them sign a agency disclosure, and so now they're my client, right? We don't own clients in any way. And the only way you get paid is if you can prove that you brought that buyer to that listing agent, and the listing agent is the one paying the co-broker on it, not the seller. So the listing agent's the one paying it, and that's what we have to prove. So make sure when you're out there working with these clients that you're the one that's bringing that buyer to the listing agent. And that's how this scenario works out, is that second agent is the one who brought that contract to them. and prevailed in this. Although there's a lot of other stuff that goes around it.
Sure.
It's not a simple, when it comes to procuring cause, it's not simple because you have so many different scenarios, right? Right, Bob?
And yet the buyers have a strange thought. I had one the other day call me complaining about our agent because she said something bad about her on email or something. She said she never sent any email, but the thing is, she says she showed me 8 houses. Now I've decided to go with somebody else. She says that's her job at West USA to show houses. So what's wrong with her by saying something bad about me? It's her job. I guess she thinks, I mean, everybody must think out there that we're getting paid a weekly paycheck.
Yeah,
Or bottom line, they don't care. I mean, the reality is they don't care. They
That's
want to buy a
right.
house, and if you don't get paid, well, you don't get paid. And we think they understand the scenario. We think they understand the process. And the reality is they don't. They really don't. We
They
need
really
to
don't.
educate them. If we go back, Mike, to your scenario here with the, giving them a list and drive by, that in and of itself can be okay, but you're going to have to educate and counsel your buyer to let them understand, what happens. If you like the outside, that's fine. But if you want, and I would present it this way, if you want me to represent you, if you want me to be your advocate and take care of you through this entire process, then you need to understand I have to be there. I have to be the one who shows you the property when you ultimately make that decision. So my suggestion is do not go in if you want that representation, or if you do, don't have any comments, and make it clear from the moment you walk in the door that I'm being represented by somebody else, and they will help me determine what's best and how I'm going to do it in the final process. So if you counsel them, you can avoid a lot of these problems.
Yeah, get it up front.
All right, so let's go through some of just the points of consideration. Perhaps this can help us a little bit define procuring cause and really what it means to us as real estate agents. So, Michael, the nature of the transaction, the listing and buyer representation agreements.
Yeah, that's what I talked about at the beginning. Procuring cause is going to happen primarily. I don't even know if we've ever had a listing scenario where there's procuring cause, but it's going to be working with buyers. It really is. So in this scenario here, the nature of the transaction, the buyer that you're working with and how they're making the offer is really going to be the consideration of if that's going to be procuring cause, if there's another agent involved.
All right, what about, Marge, the offer of cooperative compensation?
Well, here again, you get paid, as Michael said just a bit ago, with whatever that listing agent has offered through the multiple listing service. Some also think when we're talking about the compensation, it really doesn't fall under cooperative, but some think, well, I have a buyer broker agreement, and it's an exclusive buyer broker agreement. And so no matter what they buy, I'm going to get paid, and that listing agent's going to owe me. That's probably one of the biggest urban myths and misconceptions, if you will. The exclusive buyer broker agreement form is between the buyer and the buyer broker. If they purchase something else, then you have to pursue your client, the buyer, for the compensation. It is not something that the listing agent owes. But, Mike, when you said you picked me up off the road this morning, and now I'm sitting here reading a legal book. Actually, what I'm looking at, and I would recommend it to any agent listening, is Michelle Lynn's book on Arizona real estate. She has now the second edition of this book, and it covers a myriad of things. And if you want, when we said we're trying to define it, if I may for a moment, what Michelle has written, and it is what is legally documented, it says the term procuring cause is defined as a cause originating a series of events which, without break in their continuity, result in the accomplishment of the prime objective of employment of the broker, producing a purchaser ready, willing, and able to buy real estate on the owner's terms. And so, that's how it is legally defined. And so that's what I wanted to read and point out to you. But as, again, Michael and Bob have said, there are so many different nuances, when it comes to this.
By the way, you can get a copy of that book for $9.99 right now. It says $34 on the back. And you can also get one that'll go into your computer also. So you can get 2 issues of the book for $9.99.
Right.
Yeah, I paid $35 for mine, so that's a good deal.
Yeah.
What was the title of the book again, Marge?
It's the Arizona Real Estate. It says Arizona Real Estate. And then underneath that, a professional's guide to law and practice. And this, just go to aaronline.com and they'll give you the information for ordering
It's a
it.
great book.
And
Great.
all the boards have it also.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
You can get it at the board stores.
But how many of us as agents and because I work with you guys a lot, I know sometimes the frustrations of the brokers. We as agents take a look at a book like that, Bob, and say, "Yeah, I'm not going to read that. I'm just going to lean on the brokers to get me out of trouble." And I mean, but it's true. We as agents don't a lot of times really don't take the time. We think that is your responsibility to read that stuff and to know that stuff.
You should know this stuff. Yeah, you can call the broker, but that's a lot of monkey business going back and forth, and you're not moving forward in your career if you don't get educated by reading books. And there's a lot of great ones out there. I've read so many books, and I learn something every time I get into one. This thing here, I think I've got 2 or 3 copies of this book at my house. So get one.
And going back to the scenario, we got a couple questions are coming in.
Okay.
Having a buyer broker agreement signed, that would have eliminated any problems in scenario 1.
No, not at all.
No, a buyer broker agreement is not connected to a procuring cause. It's the smartest thing to do. So if you're out there working with buyers, I highly recommend get your buyer presentation down and get a buyer broker on all your buyers you're working with. But it doesn't stop procuring cause. That's just your case against that buyer. The procuring cause has to do with the commission coming from the listing agent. So it's great to have, because most of the time the other party might just say, well, I'll back out of it because you have a buyer broker. We don't want to hurt the buyer any further. But it does help out a lot, but it's not connected to procuring cause.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you say, will it eliminate it? It will eliminate the concerns about the commission if my buyer who signed that exclusive buyer broker agreement form says, oh yeah, Marge, what I did was I went and I bought it from the listing agent, but don't you worry, because at closing, I'm going to pay you the commission. I'm going to have him put it on that settlement sheet because I know you're entitled to it. Baloney.
Yeah, I was about to say, wow,
I'm like, what?
That happens?
Yeah, I was going to say now, and then the alarm goes off and you wake up.
Ding, ding,
but,
ding, ding.
But yeah, but I mean, that's the only way, again, because that buyer broker agreement is between you and the buyer.
Does an agent who's sitting on an open house, do they have an obligation to ask anyone who walks through the open house, are you working with another agent?
Yes.
Is there a requirement of that?
Yes. The National Association of Realtors has said that what we should do when starting to work with someone is always ask the question, are you under any kind of an exclusive employment agreement with another realtor? And they say you do that to eliminate, some of the problems that we're talking about. But now that has nothing to do, as Michael said, a lot of people think just getting that agency form signed is sufficient. It's got nothing to do with that agency form whatsoever.
And some of the buyers are trained out there to say, yes, I am working with someone, just to keep you off their back too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that exists. But now, and especially if they say, well, I like it, I want to write a contract, and this is somebody new to you. If you have forgotten to ask that question up to this point, that's when you want to ask it. Are you under any kind of an exclusive employment agreement form? And if they say no, then don't worry about it. If they say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, well, then, there are exclusive agreements. And the only reason we want to mention that to them is if they are, then we need to say, do understand that if you write this with me, I would be the procuring cause. I will be entitled to the compensation. And you may or may not have an issue with that other agent whom you have the exclusive employment agreement form with.
But you know something? I found a broker the other day that wrote up a transaction, and it never went through.
Uh-huh.
But underneath the transaction, he had the buyer broker agreement under there, and they signed that also. They didn't know they signed it because he did not explain it. So one of our agents wanted to go on this, and I said, "Wait a minute, they got signed up to a buyer broker agreement there." So they asked the broker over there. He said, "Don't worry about it." Matter of fact, he put it in writing. "I'm not going to enforce it. Don't worry. I do that to everybody that writes an offer on a property. I slide this under, and I have them sign that along with the offer."
Good grief.
Now, this is a broker of a company. And I thought, oh, geez, what's going on here?
Well, if you've got something in writing from the goofball that did that,
Yeah.
that says I'm not going to pursue it, I think that's good. But good grief.
All right, quick question on the ebook version of that, Bob. If somebody buys the ebook version, or if any of you have the ebook version, is it easily searchable in the sense, can you just
Absolutely.
Yeah, you could search it for words.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, just go to the back and like procuring cause. It'll tell you what pages, all of the pages where it's there. Buyer broker agreements. It's phenomenal. She
Well,
did an
it's a
incredibly
wonderful
good
book
job.
that I have both, and I don't read it
I have
from
both also.
front to cover, but when I have an issue, I'll go in and read that
Search it.
section. So I learn as I go along by reading this book. So you as an agent would be the same way. It's good to have that knowledge when you're out there working. I mean, we're here, the brokers are here for any of your calls that you come in. But if you have the basic knowledge, it's going to help you get through the transaction or through that issue much easier, much better, and you might not have to call in.
do they have the pop-up version of this book?
For
me.
Weinstein version of it, maybe.
All right, Mike, let's talk about the conduct of the seller, the buyer, and the brokers and their affiliate licensees.
Now, this gets down to a little bit more of the root of procuring cause. When we're talking about procuring cause, Marge brought up and read the point in there, the definition of it is, how is the continuity of that transaction, or from what did the buyer think from the time they wanted to buy the house till they wrote the offer? And that's where it comes in the conduct of the seller, conduct of the buyer, and conduct of the brokers. And as a panelist, and Marge, you've sat on these panels before, I believe, haven't you? Or just on
Literally hundreds of them.
Hundreds
I
of
mean,
them.
very seriously, over all these many years, yes.
So, and they take in consideration everything. And that's why procuring cause, as we talk about it today, there's no way that we can say this and this and that as procuring cause. We can give you a lot of scenarios, thoughts, and actions that you can move toward, but they will take in consideration of all the factors that led up to this buyer purchasing that property. And I think break in continuity, or the break of the chain, to me, has been one of the larger issues that I see that they really look at. Was there a break in the chain from the time that you showed that buyer the property until they bought it or wrote that contract up? If there's no break, then you have a strong procuring cause. We can't say it's 100% because we never know. You have a panel of 5 up there, and they have their own personal views. They might have had a bad day that day, or they might like that other person, right? So procuring cause is not a set way to do it, but conduct of all parties comes into play on how it works. So your conduct, when you're working out there with that buyer, my number one recommendation when we're talking about conduct, avoid doing text messages if you can. I know we all do that, but try to email. Emails are much
Have
better.
that record, yeah.
Yep, the record for the email. I like that better.
All right, another question that came in referencing and the employment agreement form.
Uh-huh.
How does that play into this, or does it?
No.
That's the ER.
I mean, honestly.
Different situation.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
a
I
look.
was going to say, now, if you're talking about the exclusive right to sell listing form, I'm not sure what what the agent asking the
Maybe
question
she's
is
thinking about
talking
the buyer
about
broker
specifically.
agreement, maybe.
But if they're talking about the ER form, that has nothing to do with it. That's just the listing form. If they're talking about the exclusive buyer broker agreement form, then it goes back to what we've said previously. That's between you and the buyer. It has nothing to do with procuring cause.
Correct.
All right, so what do we need to know about the roles and relationships of the parties?
Well, I think it's a combination of what the three of us have been saying up to this point. You need to let them know if they want representation, what it's going to be. You need to let them know if they go into a new home subdivision without you, the likelihood of you getting paid are none. There are a couple of exceptions out there, but the thing that
Yeah.
I think of, Mike, when you ask this question is, those buyers out there, with the rarest of exception, could care less when you get paid, when you don't get paid. It's emotional for them. It's a stressful time, and it's an exciting time. They want to buy the property, and whether you get paid or not, they don't care. How much you have to pay your broker, they don't care. The fact that out of that commission you have to pay taxes, they don't care. They just, honest to goodness, want to buy a house. So I think we've got to share with them. But one of the things that I tell agents all of the time, and students if I'm in a class, is you've got to present what I call the you benefits. The benefit to you, the buyer, in doing these things is, and you've got to share that with them, because again, they don't care if I get paid or don't get paid. And you don't want to say, well, if you don't go with me, I'm not going to get any money. Instead, what you want to say is, if you want me to represent you, me to make sure you've got the proper paperwork, me to make sure that all of these, all of the things are taken care of, to have an advocate, someone who can negotiate aggressively on your behalf, and someone who is going to put your interest first and foremost, then you need to have me involved every step of the way.
I actually have taken pictures of my kids in ratty clothes on the side of the freeway looking like they're starving. So I present that to potential buyers and say, if you don't use me, my kids don't eat. Is that okay?
Is that out of your family album, you mean?
Yeah, well, if nothing else, it's going to tell them you've got a sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, a little bit more on the roles before we move on there. When you think about when you're meeting that buyer for the first time, you need to ask that buyer, and Marge brought it up, ask that buyer, have you worked with any realtors in the past? Have you signed any paperwork with them? Was it 1 page or was it 3 pages?
Yeah.
That's a question. So, and most of the time that we have agents that lose commission in procuring cause. And by the way, we've had more procuring cause issues this half of the year than we had all last year.
Right.
Here at West USA. So procuring cause is becoming more of an issue, and that's why we're talking about it. And a lot has to do with the way this market is going. We're fighting over commissions a little bit more. The deals are a little bit tougher. So that's when it starts coming up. So make sure you pre-qual that a little bit more. Okay.
All right. So then let's, like, in addition to that, then let's talk about the initial contact with the buyers.
Okay.
Anyone want to jump in here?
Well,
that's what I was just talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say that's exactly what Mike, or Michael just said. I mean,
I just read what's on the teleprompter. I'm Ron Burgundy, okay?
I guess I jumped ahead a little bit on that.
Be classy, Phoenix.
Yeah.
Well, while you were reading to find out and be responsive to the people, Michael just answered that.
Yeah.
You're doing good, Barack. I mean, Michael.
My wife and I, we have a similar conversation.
No, basically, I mean, just to sum it up again, what Michael said is, when you talk with them and you sit down for that first time, ask them, have you signed any paperwork with anybody else? Are you under any kind of an employment agreement? Was it a 1-page form, thinking maybe it was the agency form, or was it 3-page, which could have been the exclusive buyer broker agreement form? But,
yeah, and that's in the agent that is meeting the buyer for the first time. That is a second agent, let's say, in line. That's where we run into that agent losing the commission more than the agent that showed it to the property at the beginning. So if you do your due diligence on a little bit more questioning of that buyer, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache when it comes to losing a commission.
What was interesting, in one of the GRI classes that I was doing, a student in there asked, what do you do when you talk to the buyer and the buyer tells you that, well, I'm working with a lot of you right now. I'm working with 3 other agents. No, I haven't signed an agreement with them, but if you'd like to be number 4, that's fine. Here's what I'm looking for.
And here's the picture of my kids on the side of the freeway. So pick me.
Yeah. Oh, that's cute. Pick me. I like that one. Yeah, that reminds me of, are you smarter than a 5th grader? But anyway.
Why do people keep asking me that?
Yeah, really. Because they say, pick me. Here we go. Anyway, Mike made me forget what I was saying, and I know it was brilliant.
Client says, I'm working with 3 of you.
That's it. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I really did forget. I lost my train of thought. Thank you. But I just shared with them, it's up to you. I mean, you can be number 4, and that's fine. But me personally, I wouldn't do it. And the reason I wouldn't do it is I'm going to say to them, here's the thing. If you're telling them the same thing you're telling me, We're going to be stepping on top of one another. We're going to be looking for the same properties. We're going to be showing you the same properties. It's just riddled with problems. I like to work exclusively with the clients that I'm working with. I'm going to ask you to work with me exclusively for these first few days and allow me this opportunity to show you the properties. If I can't satisfy your needs, that's fine. But I mean, me personally, I mean, honest to goodness, for as many, many, many years as I've been doing this, I personally would not be one of 3 or 4 knowing that they're actively doing it. I would choose to work with somebody else.
Now, well, okay, so let's make a scenario out of that. Okay, there's 4 agents that a buyer's working with. Okay, I'm agent number 1. I show them a home. Agent number 2 takes them back to the same home and they buy from agent number 2.
Okay. Well, the big question now in a hearing, number 1 agent is going to say, I'm entitled to the commission. And that's kind of the scenario that Michael and I had the other day. So they're going to say, hey, wait, they came in here with me. I showed it to them first. That's fine. Well, obviously they didn't make the decision to buy with you. They went to agent number 2. Now the question's going to be, what did agent number 2 do that number 1 didn't do? You know, did he help with the financing? Did he help satisfy some of the concerns and the fears that they had about purchasing a property? Was it his knowledge, his explanations, and his work that led that buyer to the decision that they wanted it to buy? If that's the case, number 2 is going to win.
What about if it just came down to availability? Okay, agent 1's done all the work and pre-qualified with agent 1's lender and everything like that. Then the buyer calls, says, I want to go back to the house. I'm sorry, I can't. And then, you know, because I got something going on with the family. So the buyer then contacts agent number 2 and says, agent number 1 is not available right this second. Will you let me in the house? And then they buy with agent number 2.
Yeah, we had that same scenario happen here with one of our agents that showed a buyer a property for weeks and showed them this one house 3 times. And the buyer was really interested in the house, but was kind of waiting to see what's going on with the market. The buyer called our agent at 8 o'clock in the morning and said, hey, you know what? I really want to buy that house that they again showed them for weeks. And I'd like to write that offer right now. I think the market's changing. I'd like to get it written now. Our agent said, well, I can't write it right now because I'm driving out to go show another property, but I'll be done around 11. I'll meet you at 11 and I'll write that offer up. The buyer drove into work and got to work and said, I really want this house. So he called up another agent who had never even showed him that property. Called up another agent and said, hey, I really want this property. Can you write an offer up on me yet on this property? And the agent said, sure. Wrote up the offer, got it accepted before 11. Our agent called him up at 11 o'clock, said, all right, I'll meet you at the property or meet you at my office and we'll get this all written up. The buyer said, I'm sorry, I already bought it. Now,
who gets paid?
Who gets paid on that is why our agent was calling in. And this actually went to a hearing on this, and it was found out that it was abandonment by our agent, abandoned that buyer because it wasn't ready at the time. Now, I'm sure we're going to get a ton of questions coming in on this because.
Well, I was just going to say, though,
let's and as we continue the conversation, this goes to our last point here, continuity of contact. I mean, abandonment and estrangement.
That's abandonment right
exactly.
There. Wow.
Well, and I was going to say, I have chaired panels and I have served on panels where those hearings were. Number 2 would win. Number 2 would prevail. And I understand that you're out with somebody else, but especially remember when the market was so hot. Yeah. Oh my gosh, did we have hearings then when the market was really hot? And they said, well, but I was showing somebody else and it was only 2 hours. Well, as many of our agents will remember, if you were licensed then, you put a property on the market and sight unseen, you could have 10 contracts on it within the first hour because of the availability of properties. And when an agent says, I would love to do it, but I can't do it, if it's that important to them then and there, the agent will have been determined to have abandoned them. So if nothing else, what they're saying is agent number 1 should have said, I'll have one of my associates handle it for you. I'll have somebody else write it for you, because to them, they really felt they were going to lose. And
that's it. Mike needs that little bell when we get that thing right there. Ding, 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 because that's it. That agent, our agent should have called.
There we go.
Got another agent involved with it, someone to help that buyer out and not abandon them while he goes out.
But that brings up a whole different issue. And I don't want to digress too much, but we always view the other agents in the office like they're competitors, and they are to a sense, but they're the enemy, and I can't build relationships, and I don't want to risk anything. And whereas it's so important for us to build those relationships with fellow agents, to have people to lean on.
You know, Mike, if you look at the top producing agents, and not just in our company, but in Arizona and nationwide, those top agents build relationships with others. They don't view them as they view them as competitors, but not from a negative perspective. Sure, I'm competing with you, but I'm competing with me to be the best I can be and do what I can do. And they build those relationships so that I could pick up the phone and call Bob and say, Bob, I'm showing this property, but I've got this buyer who wants to write a contract. Are you available to help me now? And I can negotiate something with him meaning with Bob, where Bob might say, sure, I'll tell you what, for just a flat fee, I'll do this.
Mm-hmm.
Or for a certain percentage, I'll do this. Or depending on the relationship that Bob and I have, Bob might say, it's my pleasure to help you because you have helped me. You know, and it's just something where it could be a reciprocal thing too, not always with monetary consideration.
I have a little bit different look at this, the scenario you had there. I would have said, yes, I'll be right there. And I would have called my associate to go and do what I was on the way to do, because it's important. They want me right now to write this sucker up, and I'd be there because I know this is really something, but what I'm on my way to do may be nothing.
Correct.
Excellent point.
Good point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day,
I don't know.
You're not protected unless you've actually got an executed contract. I mean, you can't just assume because I've shown somebody a house multiple times that no matter what happens.
Yeah, you know, the other thing you've got to keep in mind, it doesn't matter from a procuring cost standpoint. It does not matter how long you have been working with them. It does not matter how many homes that you have shown them. It doesn't matter if you have represented them in the past. You know, there is no such thing as
Doesn't
exclusivity.
matter if you have a buyer broker agreement.
Exactly. Yeah, it is property specific. And the question is, when did they make the decision to buy?
Yeah.
And with whom? Who was the cause of, you know, helping them reach that decision?
You know, and I always like to tell agents, you know, back to the competition thing. To me, the other agents aren't the competition. The competition is the Zillows and the Trulias and the Realtor.coms. That's who we've got to figure out who to beat, because, you know, they're killing us out there. But okay, so great question, and I think I understand the question. So back to the scenario that I created, or the one that you did, that you brought up.
Michael did.
It's a hard
The
one.
second agent, the agent that just got the call,
Right.
what is their fiduciary duty? Do they have? Well, I don't even understand the question.
Well, they would have a fiduciary duty to the
the
buyer. They would
Right.
have a fiduciary duty to the buyer. If you're thinking from an ethics standpoint, I wonder if that's what the callers or the question is. If they're thinking from an ethical, is that ethical? Sure. There's no violation of any of the 17 articles in the code with the scenario the way Michael presented it.
Right.
All right. So let's go to another scenario.
Okay.
If I can here.
By the way, if I may real quickly, as you're doing that, when you say abandonment, a question might come up because you also mentioned estrangement.
Yeah. Estrangement.
One hearing that we had was where the buyer's agent said, I am the procuring cause. The buyer said, I went to somebody else. Now, and actually it goes back a number of years, and the agent that they called, the buyer called to write the contract, was a West USA agent. She prevailed and did win in the arbitration. And the thing was, the buyer broker who took the buyer to the property said, no, wait a minute, stop. Because the seller offered wine to the buyer and to the agent. And she said, no, we can't drink. And the buyer said, oh, no, I would like very much to have a glass of wine. And so the seller gave him wine. And the agent who took them in said, hey, wait a second, I don't work with drunks. And the buyer just ignored her and had a glass of wine. The seller, looking out on a patio and looking at the city lights, made the comment that, we can do this and this, and started negotiating. And that agent said, stop. You may not discuss this. You guys may not talk about it. The seller said, hey, now you stop for a minute. I'll talk to this buyer if I want to talk to this buyer. She said, well, then we're leaving. I won't work with the drunk, and you guys are not to negotiate. And the seller said, I think you should leave. And so she looked at her buyer and she said to the buyer, and this is all from testimony, I'm not exaggerating this. She said to the buyer, I'm going to leave and you won't have transportation. And he said, well, you go ahead and leave. I'm going to have a second glass of wine and I'll bet I'll find a way home. Well, the seller then called his listing agent. The listing agent went over and wrote the contract and prevailed. And they said, no, if that was estrangement, I don't have to work with somebody who calls me a drunk or says I can't talk. And they were so highly offended that, that was an easy determination also.
And I'm sure Mike gets strange feelings all the time, right, Mike, when you're out there working?
Especially with the kids on the freeway starving. Yeah.
That's why I have a bottle of wine with me. Okay, so back to this fiduciary duty, Michael, in your other scenario.
Sure.
So you're about to go show homes.
Right.
Okay, but your client that you've shown homes, showed a home to 3 previous times. What is your fiduciary duty to that client that says, hey, no, I want to write it now?
That's the problem, that you have a fiduciary duty to them to not abandon them. Now, it doesn't mean you physically have to do it. Bob brought up a good point that you should drop everything and do that. But you also have a responsibility to the buyer who you're meeting out there too. So you as a professional and realtors out there, we orchestrate the whole deal. We're not just one little person that does one side of it. We orchestrate the mortgage companies, title companies, everything. So when this buyer says, I want to write an offer up on it, you need to orchestrate that. You need to figure out, how am I going to go show this property to this buyer who I also represent and work with this buyer now who wants to write this offer? That's what you have to do. You have to work that out. You can't abandon them saying, I can't meet you right now. We're not a single entity out there. We work with multiple people. Marge brought up that point. We have to work with other agents. We have, team members within your own company, whatever company you're out there with, and make sure that you connect with them. And that's the thing about working with your clients.
All right, so let's get into another scenario. This was actually a scenario that I had with one of my team members.
Okay.
So and it's kind of stuck with me. So an agent holds an open house at another agent's listing. Okay. A buyer looks at the house and tells the open house agent that they are interested in the house and will come back. The open house agent is unable to reach that buyer and then later learns that the buyer purchased the home from the listing agent. So the listing agent asked another agent to hold an open house, but then the buyer came back and just bought it from the listing agent and didn't get back to the agent who was holding the open house, if that makes sense. Who gets paid?
Depends. You want to answer that first, Bob?
Yeah, who gets paid? The one that wrote it up.
Okay. Now, when you say it, yeah, initially maybe, but the only hesitation I have with saying that is that our listeners are going to think, okay, so if I write the contract, I get paid, and that's not true. So, and I know Bob knows far more than that, but in this scenario, it depends. It really does. And
there isn't much up there.
Well, yeah, but when we're saying
it's missing what happened when that buyer was at the open house. How long did that buyer sit there? How long did they talk to that agent who's sitting at that open house?
Well, but even put the time aside, the part that I like the way that Mike wrote this, all the buyer said is, I'm interested in the house and I'll come back. Okay, so what interest? Now, when he came back, what was the pause? What was the consideration? What did the listing agent say or do? We go back to that. What did they say or do? They say, well, I told the other agent that I was interested in the home and they didn't offer financing options or suggestions. And, I have a lot of concerns about that. Now the listing agent sits down with them and goes through the process with them. And they say, well, how could I do that? And the listing agent tells them. Then the listing agent's going to prevail and the listing agent's going to get paid. if we have the twist and the situation though where the buyer says, I really like this, I want to buy this, and then comes back to the listing agent, and the determination was made while the buyer or the other agent was there, then they're going to prevail. And that's where, like Michael and Bob have both said too, when it gets to a hearing, you don't know what they're going to say, and you know one side and one version of it, and just a little twist can make a change. I would almost think that, at least in my experience, when something like this happens, the listing agent would usually compensate that other agent in some manner. They don't have to, but at least that's been my experience.
And you can't think of procuring cause as, I'm the agent who brought the buyer to the house, so I should get paid.
Right.
It's not linear like that.
Yeah, there's no threshold.
It's a big up and down line of what's going down. And I think that's where a lot of agents get caught up in procuring cause. They think, well, I brought the buyer there, I get paid on it. And Marge kind of alluded that when they look at procuring causes as what's the total action of both realtors on influencing this buyer or helping this buyer with that property.
All right, let's go to another scenario. And I like this one because, now we're going to introduce social media. Something that you as brokers didn't have to worry about 3, 4, 5 years ago. So agent takes a buyer to look at a home. Buyer agrees that they want the house and tells the agent that they will call them later. The buyer eventually buys the home from another agent, and it is later learned that the buyer felt abandoned because the original agent unfriended them on Facebook. Who gets paid? So agent 1 unfriends the buyer. Buyer gets mad, and even though it says, I'm coming back to buy the home, I'm going to go get another agent because you hurt my feelings.
Tough.
Tough for who?
Tough for the buyer.
Yeah.
No, honestly, the social media has nothing to do with it whatsoever. Honestly, it has nothing to do with it whatsoever. And the fact that they were unfriended on Facebook has no determination. Let me put it this way, should have no determining factor in determining who's going to be entitled.
But in your earlier scenario with the wine and everything, it was filed under estrangement because you told me you didn't want to work with a drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it might come up with the fact that that's how they met. Maybe the buyer and the agent met on social media and were friended. So if you're looking at it, look at Marge is looking at me funny because the panel members might look at it that way. When we go in there as brokers and we help our agents make their case on the procuring cause, because we do that. Well, one of the things I might say, the first thing that popped up in my mind is like, wait a minute, this is how they met. They met on Facebook for marketing and advertising. So maybe that unfriending could be considered an abandonment or estrangement at that point. So what we're saying is, Marge is saying one thing, I'm picking out maybe something else that's out of it. It's looked at many different ways that things happen out there.
Yeah,
well,
I would like that statement you just made. If you unfriend me, you're done.
Yeah. That happens to me all the time.
You're going to throw them on the freeway, aren't you?
We're not going to work anymore.
But what we're saying is that nothing's cut and dried, right?
Right.
That it could we take in all the scenarios.
One of the things, Michael, that you said in the very beginning that I think very much applies here. You have a panel of 5 members who are
We're going to
peers.
get to that. Actually, our next slide is getting into the process of how we.
But my only point here is what he said in the very beginning was you don't know what their thoughts are. You don't know what their attitude's going to be. You don't know what their experiences are. And you have to convince with, preponderance of the evidence, a majority of that panel. And if the panel looks at it exactly as Michael does, then they might say, hey, no, the one who actually wrote the contract. And that decision is final. So even though I have my opinion, his twist and his spin could very easily be the case. I can tell you that the National Association of Realtors, right now, the Professional Standards Committee is working on this specific issue because social media has become so prevalent, in our day-to-day workings. And they're looking at the possibility of adding an additional standard of practice that would address these things specifically. Now, that hasn't been done yet, but it is something that's being considered.
That's good.
Wow.
Yeah. See what you get for leading us down that path.
I know. It's just crazy. But anyway, so then, well, I mean, so generally, though, in your opinion, though, in this situation, because, I mean, we joked around, said tough, oh, the buyer got feelings hurt.
Yeah.
Buyer's not getting paid anyways.
No.
So I think we have to remove the buyer's feelings in the sense of who gets paid in this situation, what agent.
And how it's presented to the panel has a lot to do with it, especially
Totally.
here. If you have one broker that doesn't dig deeper on it and talk about the relationship that they had on social media and present it to the panel differently, that influences. So when you do have a procuring cause and whatever broker that you're using out there, they'll make their case, just like an attorney will in a court case, of why we should get that commission to my agent. And the panel doesn't always think of all scenarios. They don't really. They really go by what is presented to them from those people. They try not to think outside and bring their own stuff in. They want to hear the facts, or they want to hear the thoughts of both parties.
All right, so let's start with you, Marge, because it seems like you've had probably a lot more experience in this.
A lot more.
So Bob and I, we get into it. When Bob and I were going to battle over procuring cause, and he gets the commission, and I feel like I should get the commission. How does that process work, and then how does it get resolved, and who resolves it? You mentioned the panel. What's the panel?
Okay.
Who is the panel?
Well, there are so many.
Are there a bunch of Pokemon from Pokemon Go? We got Pikachu and Pansasia on this panel.
No. There are so many different things here. A little bit ago, Bob was talking about one that's that he's dealing with that's internal. Individual companies can handle it internally if they wish. Some companies actually set up a company process and a company panel where they will hold their own hearing. Now, the majority of people will go to the Arizona Association of Realtors, to the Professional Standards Committee, to file a complaint. Now, for those who are listening who are a part of SEVRAR, the Southeast Valley Regional Association, they handle theirs separately in their association rather than going through the state association. But if we talk about the majority are going to call AAR, and they're going to end up talking.
Do not call the commissioner.
No, the commissioner.
She doesn't care.
Yeah, she doesn't. Yeah, the Department of Real Estate does not get involved in this, and that's a good point.
Because we assume Department of Real Estate.
People do, yes, and they do not get into commission disputes. Period. They'll just refer them back to the Arizona Association of Realtors. You contact AAR, they will put you in touch with the head of that area, and that happens to be Carol Ridley. But she and Jan Stewart handle, these issues. They will send the paperwork that's necessary to, in this case, the complainant, the one who says, I think I'm entitled to it. You fill out the forms, you fill out the request. There is a deposit, a $500 deposit that you're going to have to make if it actually goes to a hearing.
Both parties.
Yes, yep. Both parties will have to do this if it actually goes to a hearing. The prevailing party will get their $500 back. But so they fill out the forms. The Professional Standards Committee has to appoint a panel, and there are 5. You have a chairman and 4 panel members. The chair only votes when you're asking who decides these things. The chair only votes, to break a tie. But what they look at, and that's why you have an odd number, so that, you're always going to have, some balance that way. But they submit the complaint. They pick the panel. They have the time in the day.
Where does the panel come from?
All over. I mean, there are,
because this sounds like fun. I'd like to sign up.
Brokers.
Yeah, I mean, you have brokers, you have salespeople, big cities, little cities. It's all over. I believe we have somewhere close to 100 members of the Professional Standards Committee. Gosh, I wish I had Carol. But yeah, it's from all around the state. So AAR assembles a panel. It has to be a panel of your peers, meaning that if it is a residential dispute like this one that we're talking about, they have members who serve on that panel who have knowledge in that area. If it was property management, they would have property management. If it happened to be commercial, they want commercial, so that it truly is a panel of your peers. So you go in to the hearing, you have a complainant, the one saying, hey, I want the money. And they're usually with their broker, because the compensation comes through to the broker, and they present their case to this panel of 5 people. They can have witnesses. They can, ask, whatever questions they want, but they present their case to the panel. The respondent, the person who got the commission, the respondent can cross-examine them. It's kind of like court, but without all of the technicalities. So that respondent, if the plaintiffs have presented something, the respondent can ask questions. Wait a minute, you just said this. Wasn't this the case instead? So they can do cross-examination. Oh, it is. I mean, honestly,
we should
it's
make a reality show out of this.
Yeah, you could. But, it truly is.
Judge Marge.
Yeah. Well, what do they call? Isn't it Fox that says fair and balanced? But that's what we work for. So anyway, after they've presented their case, they could have witnesses if necessary. Then their part is done. Then the hearing process goes to the respondent. The respondent may make their case. They can say and do whatever they want to the panel to have them understand what happened from their perspective. The complainant can cross-examine them. Then once each side has had the opportunity to make the presentations, then they have closing statements. So they go back to the complainant. Complainant can make a closing statement. When done, boy, they're done. Nothing more. No more rebuttals, nothing. They're done. They then go to the respondent, who makes their case, closing statements. It's over. It's done. They thank the parties are dismissed, and the panel goes into what they call an executive session. And in that executive session, they have to sort through everything that was presented, all of the evidence that was submitted, so that they can decide what, who prevailed, who's going to get the commission.
Can a buyer be required to come in and testify?
No.
It can't be forced?
No,
they can be asked, or sometimes they'll make a statement. An affidavit, which is good also.
All right. So obviously, okay. So if the panel's split, you really can't have a split panel because you have an odd number of people on the panel. Are there scenarios where they'll just split the commission and say, you know what, this is so complicated?
1 in a million.
This person's got a case and this person's kind of got a case. So let's just divvy up and whack up the commission 50-50.
No.
1 in a million.
I saw it one time only over at Sevrar.
So you say there's a chance.
Yeah, 1 in a million.
Yeah.
I mean, Bob's been doing this over 40 years. It will be the exception to the rule. Right. It's always one party gets it. That's why we say with mediation, you have a win-win scenario, because everybody gets something, or at least has a say in what happens. You go into an arbitration, the decision is final. And typically you have one who prevails or wins and one who loses.
Yeah, it's usually all or nothing.
Yeah. AA or NAR, the National Association.
You first or your last, shake and bake.
Yeah. Right. The National Association of Realtors used an example to say, here's about the only time you would ever split something. And the example was, the man was out golfing. He and his wife wanted to buy a house. He's out golfing. And one of the people that he was paired with happened to be a realtor. He's telling him he wanted something, and the realtor said, when we're done, I'm going to go show you a home that I know that is fantastic. So he, the realtor, takes his golf partner out and shows him a home that he loves. Now, separate from that, his wife is now at a hairdresser. She's getting her hair done and so forth. And darn if the lady in the chair next to her isn't a realtor, and she's saying, we are looking for a home. She says, man, I've got the perfect home for you. So they both get their hair done. They're just dolled up. And now the lady realtor takes Mrs. Buyer and shows her the same house, neither party knowing about it. Both of them decide, I love this house, I want this house. That would be a scenario where both are procuring cause, and it would be split. But it has to be something that strange. And that's why I say it. Yeah, it really is 1 in a million. It's always one wins and one loses.
All right, final thought, Mike.
Just remember, and I think I said it before, when it comes to procuring cause, when you're out there working and a buyer approaches you about a property, start asking questions. How did you hear about this property? Have you talked to another realtor? Just dive into it, and that'll protect yourself from any procuring cause cases that you're working out there. And I think it relies more heavily on the realtor that buyer contacts last to really check into it.
All right, Bob. Thank you. Marge, thank you. You can go back to the side of the road.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you very much for joining us. I want to
Thank
encourage
you.
everybody, if you haven't done so already, to join our Six-Figure Mindshift digital community, where we just bring you a lot of good training like this, weekly blogs, and update on events such as the Broker Roundtable. Go ahead and register at sixfiguremindshift.com. And our next Broker Roundtable is going to be Friday, August 26th, and everybody will get some reminders and some notifications. And we have yet to determine the topic, but I've got some great ideas. Appreciate everybody joining us today. And if you have any additional questions, you can go ahead and email us at info@brokerroundtableaz.com. That's info@brokerroundtableaz.com. Appreciate you joining us.